Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and a video viewer series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, we'll be reviewing the adventure The Last Voyage of the Cold Comfort, designed by Tal Aviezer for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and Tal is a long-standing patron of patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you're interested in a sponsored review, you can reach out to me via email, Twitter, or on Discord, or on my submission form at roguewatson.com. And of course, you can support me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. I absolutely have enjoyed and loved Tal's previous adventures. I was very excited to review his latest work, but I have two problems with this adventure, one of which is not kind of nitpicky and really doesn't matter in the end. The other, though, kind of does matter. We're going to get into that. But this is a third level adventure, very horror themed, that takes place in the Underdark, specifically on a ship on the Dark Lake. So that's a very unique, specific location for any adventure to take place. It's kind of set up like a encounter table. And in fact, I think the length and brevity lend it to being more of an encounter than a full adventure, which is basically my big complaint about this adventure. The other complaint, I guess, is just the look of this thing. It's very, very plain. I think this is Tal style, just, doesn't go with any of the sepia toned, pages or anything that a lot of modern releases do on the DM's Guild. And, if I were reviewing this like 4 or 5 years ago, whenever I started reviewing adventures on the DM's Guild, I don't think I'd hardly even bat an eye at this. Instead, I would be really impressed by the other ones I did go the extra mile with creating a nice, presentation. But now things have shifted. I think the bar is raised quite a bit, and I'm not going to complain like an official con and negative for this adventure. The fact that it's just kind of a, normal looking document or something with some sidebars. But, like I said, the bar has been raised, and I don't think it takes much to feed this through the, template that makes it at least look like a D&D release, sort of. So that's my kind of minor complaint. The things that matter, which is the content, the maps, the tables, all that kind of stuff, the handouts is here and looks great. So for that reason, I'm not going to count this as an official con, but looking at it, it's almost shocking to see a recent release from a designer whom I love, and then be like, oh wow, this really looks like it was released like 4 years ago or something. So that's kind of a bummer. The adventure, like I said, takes place on the Dark Lake and is a horror adventure that's seems like a classic trope, although I don't know if I could come up with examples, but kind of like Alien or Thing, or really any like zombie or vampire movie where somebody gets like infected or something, but where basically the twist is that or maybe like Ghost Ship, even in a way, like you encounter a derelict thing, and you're kind of trying to piece back and figure out why this area has been there's a killer obviously on the loose, and of course the twist is, who is the killer, where did the killer come from? And that's part of the cool twist in this adventure. But it is so short and so quick that it almost feels like you could just explain this whole thing in a single paragraph on an encounter table versus having an overall adventure. It's designed for third level. It does have adventure scaling from first to fourth level, which is pretty nice for the individual encounters, although there are not really that many. We do get several adventure hooks, which I'm very impressed by, which kind of act as our part one or introduction for this adventure, including one that feels like the designer really wants you to take this adventure hook and kind of frame the adventure around it, because it adds much needed beginning and ending to this, again, what I would consider to be more of an encounter than an adventure, which is you are hired by a gnome from what's the town? Mantle Dara, the trading post in the Underdark. You're hired to just figure out what's going on with this ship that is supposed to have been due It's a slave ship by the Dwergar, and it's been derelict in the Dark Lake, and we're basically going out to investigate it. That's fine. That's a decent, like, adventure hooks can be just, hey, there's a thing over here we know about. Why don't we hire you badass adventurers to go investigate it? Because that's basically what badass adventurers do. They investigate dangerous areas. So I'm totally fine with that, and it works out because you've got an NPC at the beginning, which is nice, although he doesn't get set foot on the ship yet. And then at the end, it creates kind of a cool ending sequence where the Zentarum kind of show up, which I think, again, this adventure really needs that extra bit, because the whole thing is basically like 3 rooms of this ship. It's a long ship. It doesn't have any sails or anything. It's dead bodies everywhere as you're exploring it. Things went very, very badly. I can go ahead and reveal the twist, because obviously that's what we're doing here, is we're explaining the whole adventure. And that a bunch of people were kidnapped by Drow and sold into slavery to the Dwergar, and they're transporting them on their ship. Well, it turns out one of the people who was captured had recently been infected with lycanthropy, specifically of the werebore variety, and that person transformed and basically killed everyone on the entire ship. I don't know if it ever explains how many Dwergar there were on the ship, other than just kind of talking about bodies being everywhere. I don't know mechanically. I know werebore is very strong, and the thing about lycanthropes is I think they're like immune to non-magical damage. That actually probably would be able to kill everybody. But Dwergar are also pretty strong themselves. They got the embiggen ability. They've got visibility. I love Dwergar as an enemy. They're fun, but I don't know. I guess a werebore would probably be able to take everybody out. But and that one person is like hiding now, and it can be, the big twist can be whether they're just a violent monster, or of course they're like, I don't know what happened, I don't know what went wrong, and then it becomes sort of a ticking time bomb situation. There's a neat bit where there's a Dwergar body being dragged on a rope, and there's a plesiosaurus like kind of being dragged or is eating the Dwergar, and the players end up like jacking with it or going around the ship too much. That plesiosaurus can attack, so that's kind of an optional battle. The main deck doesn't have anything on it, and then there's an entrance to the lower deck, and the captain's bodies everywhere. It's a real grisly horror scene, and there's a captain's cabin which is locked, and then the lower deck. They can either break down the door or find the key eventually in the lower deck. The captain is still alive. He's the one survivor, the sole survivor of this brutal attack. He's gone delirious because it happened days ago. He's running out of food and water. So that's also an optional combat encounter. Most likely would be a combat encounter. It's also Dwergar. But technically, the players could talk him down with some proper charisma checks and maybe try and get some answers, though he doesn't even have that many answers. He just thinks that some kind of monster has crawled up on deck, which, you're in the Underdark, you're on the Dark Lake. It could be all kinds of different things, so that's fair enough. And then when you get to the lower deck, you find more bodies everywhere. There are opportunities for looting purposes. One of the prisoners has a handout of a journal entry, which is kind of creepy and fun. And then the captain has a handout that you can find. Although his handout, which is a journal, is found in a trapped lockbox. The players can pick it and help themselves to the treasure, or they can find the key later on and then open it. Obviously, he won't be very happy with that, and it'll turn him hostile. But I was a little confused. Well, first of all, I want to say I don't like putting the journal in the lockbox. I would put it on his body, and then the players can get more of that context if they kill him without the social encounter. That way they see, they get the kind of storytelling immersion. It also doesn't make any sense, like story-wise, if the captain's log is locked in this cabin, because it even writes like his final entry is like, oh, there's people at the door and they're opening the lock, and I'm not going out with a fight, but it's like in the lockbox doesn't have the key to it. The key's somewhere else. So that was a weird plot hole to me. The lower deck, they find the journal with one of the prisoners said it, and it gets very creepy, and he's like, oh man, they caught all of us. One of them's acting really weird, and I'm really afraid of what's going on. It's very dark and very serious, which props to the designer for writing a very darkly serious horror encounter adventure, and not it never feels like exploitative or weird or anything. It's just a really well done horror story. And even though it's kind of a classic idea, so is everything. and frankly, I really enjoy when people take very obvious ideas or tropes or storytelling things that we're all very familiar with, narrative styles and everything that everybody like, oh yeah, of course, we're doing the Star Wars story. This is the Indiana Jones trap or something, and everybody knows a thing, and then you put it in D&D. it works beautifully because everybody immediately says, "Oh yes, I recognize this thing. This is so much fun for me to be able to experience this through an RPG." So I love that idea, and like I said, I couldn't even specifically identify this one, which is good from a specific movie or story or book or anything, but just the idea of it being it's a secret. The killer is actually one of the victims here, and it's this whole derelict ship that you're finding, which is to me very like alien-esque. You're finding this derelict ship, and there's a monster in there essentially. And then you just get to the cargo hold, and you find Kara, who is the werebore, and the designer even just says, "Hey, whatever you want to do here is fine," which I get is nice for DMs, but I also wish we had just gotten a bit more. Frankly, I wish we had gotten more every single step of the way, because this is basically the end of it, where they find her, and then it's like, look, is she just completely hostile, and you have to, as a wereborn, you have to kill her, which that doesn't seem terribly satisfying, because it's like, oh, yeah, okay, it's a werebore here, and I guess one of the prisoners was a werebore. Well, that's, done and done. Or is she freaking out and she doesn't know what she's done? And then it becomes a way more interesting, like, oh yeah, so this is just bad timing, and also apparently you're a werebore, and you killed a lot of slaver dwergers, which is probably good, but you also killed a lot of your fellow captives. Like, everybody's dead, all the prisoners were like chained up and they're dead, including like young people. Like that's bad. Like, it's pretty serious and crazy. But then, like, what happens then, right? Like, the future of the adventure, we don't have any information there. It just says, like, hey, if she accompanies the party, that she may still prove dangerous to them when the moon is full. But there's no additional like story here, or it could be sneaky, where she's actually essentially either has been evil the whole time or has become evil, where she knows what she did, but she's being duplicitous and perhaps trying to say, hey, I'm just a victim here. I don't know what's going on. So you kind of play the innocent Kara version, but then it turns out she actually tries to betray the players at the end. That may work better if she was like with the players the whole time, and then like she betrays them later on or something. But to just find somebody and then have them, but I don't feel like the players would already be pretty like keen to not being betrayed at that point. Some very nice encounter adjusting. Like I said, all these little, which there's only the one captain. This encounter with Kara at the werebore, and then technically the plesiosaurus, is all different encounters they could have. All three of these, if you notice, are optional encounters. I'm not saying that you got to have a ton of battle in your adventure, but it feels like you're going to go by real quick, especially if the players are handling it with no battle whatsoever. And it does mention there's an optional content you can do. If you had taken the best, which I consider the best, adventure hook, where you get hired by the gnome and you get sent out there to investigate the ship, then you can have a bunch of Zentarum show up demanding that they turn over any treasure, and it becomes kind of an interesting little standoff and maybe a proper climax at the end, which I would definitely use, because again, that adds on some much needed context. Whole thing's only like, what are we at, page 13 right now? So I really, really, really wanted more out of this adventure. This one left me wanting more, which is often a phrase used complimentary, because you're like, oh, I'm so thrilled about what was here. I just want to have more of this delicious meal. Well, in this case, it's like I ate like an appetizer and it was good, but now I'm still waiting for the main course. So it left me wanting more, but not in a good way, where it's like, I no, seriously, like, where's the rest of the meal? Like, give me more adventure. I feel like the whole thing could be described in a single paragraph, which is, in like an encounter table, where the players, you're on the Dark Lake, you encounter a derelict ship, the captain still lives, but he's delirious, and it turns out one of the prisoners is a secret werebore and killed everyone. Boom. That's a great idea for encounter, by the way. That's awesome. That's badass. And then this just slightly expands that encounter into like just detailing each of those steps along the way. It still doesn't feel like a full adventure to me. However, it doesn't, I don't know, I guess it doesn't have a conclusion. I don't feel like just finding Kara is a proper conclusion. I feel like we needed more there. And it does mention very briefly a potentially interesting conclusion is if Kara and the captain are brought face to face. She identifies him as the ship's captain, and he can still, I guess he suddenly gets his wits about him, considers her his property, and won't willing allow her to leave the ship unless he's paid at least 75 gold pieces, or you can talk him down to fewer gold pieces, or most likely the players will just want to fight and kill him because he's a Dwarger slaver. That could be, I guess, a climactic resolution at the end, or we've got the Zentarum thing at the end. I really wish that the ship itself had been a little bit more dungeon crawly, like a few more things along the way, and things for the players to find, and more upsetting horror to deal with, because the designer was such a good job of the few rooms we got of really painting a picture of just how like grisly and nasty this whole scene was, and how all these poor people were just brutally murdered by some kind of vicious animal. Maybe we could have done some kind of scavenger monster could have been here that made their way on the ship that they could battle, just to help with the kind of combat pacing. Or maybe like the Zentarum here, maybe have so I already said scavengers, and I said so monsters who were scavenging the bodies, or we could have more people type enemies that were like looting the bodies, and they could also be like a combat encounter for the players to deal with. I wanted more. I wanted this to feel more like a creepy horror dungeon crawl, where they slowly learn that, like, oh man, it turns out that the killer is, and maybe even have like a red herring where you think like one of the Dwergers maybe gone insane or something, but it turns out they're just a cultist, and you find their shit in their room, and like, oh well, they didn't do it. And then you get to the end and you realize, oh shit, it was just one of the poor prisoners actually was super just hulked out and broke their bonds and went werewolf form and killed everybody. It was super crazy. So it's such a cool potential idea for an adventure, but I just wish I literally wish it was like twice as long and just had more content. We do get some maps to go along with it, which is great. I love having good map art. I think the ship is a really fun location, very classic horror structure, which you have a very confined space where you can't really exit very easily. So that's a great location for a horror adventure. And I really love these handouts. I was annoyed that the first one is behind a lockbox, which to me doesn't make any sense. The second one you can find a lot easier on the prisoners, but both of them really do a great job painting that immersive picture of this horror and the creepier things are happening as you go along. Like, yes, give me that. That's exactly what I want from a horror themed adventure. Let's go over my pros and cons for The Last Voyage of the Cold Comforts. Pro: excellent horror themed concept. Fantastic. I love it so much. I like the taking, again, that familiarity of a story and then inserting it into an RPG to let all the players play it out. Although this one, I think, does have some originality, at least specifically, using a werewolf, for example, and the slaving ship crew, all that I haven't seen exactly played out in horror before. So that's a really cool idea there. Pros: full color maps and immersive player handouts. I will give a thumbs up to the good presentation of the adventure, the stuff that matters. We've also got like stat blocks who are presented here and everything. I mean, everything is well written. It's edited. Like, all that part is good. It's literally just like the fact that it's just blank white pages and stuff. That's kind of the bummer, but I'm actually going to give it a pro that we got the stuff that we really need to and the stuff that cares about. Pro: encounter level scaling from 1st to 4th level. It is designed for 3rd level, but something that a lot of designers do, especially if they design Adventures League content or have just run a lot of adventures, they give you those encounter scaling level adjustments. So if you want to run with slightly different level combinations, or more players or fewer players, then you can plug in those the APL, the average party level, and strength adjustment and everything, and then have those little notes on there. For example, if you want to have first levels, maybe Kara's a were-rat instead of a were-boar or something. Or if they're maybe more players, just increase her hit points by quite a bit. Cons, and unfortunately it's a big one, is its extremely short length. Really makes this feel more like an encounter than an adventure. We're really close to that line, in my view, of, I talk about encounters versus layers versus adventures versus campaigns. And this one really feels like it's kind of the needle between adventure and encounter. I don't know. It's maybe in the middle, but to me, it's even pointing towards encounter. I feel like I've played. I feel like I've seen things that would treat this more as an encounter than an adventure. If the dungeon had been a little bigger, or if it had more at the first act or a final act or something, I think we could have gone into the adventure standpoint. But I think this one, I think it's It's a wonderful idea, but I really wish there was just more to it. Final verdict, The Last Voyage of the Cold Comfort is a classic horror tale in a memorable location, but it's over almost as soon as it begins. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on the channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shouts to Platinum Patrons, Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brennan, Zenicider, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Corey, Big Nut, John F., John L., Eric, Tyler, Nathan, for Crystal, Counselor, Andrew, Daryl, The Reldron, Captain Woody 79, Stephanie, Andy, Patrick, Jason, Ismail, Amit, Lumpy, Spud, Sharni, David, and William, and Amnesiac, and Gold Patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Dillas, Allowance, Sam, Madrome, Nathan, Fast, Like a Tortoise, Scott, Rufus, Carolyn, Jerry, Glenn, Marcus, and Mark. Thank you all very much for your support.